The dust never seemed to settle in the forward operating base. It clung to everything: the sandbags stacked against the walls, the metallic frames of the watchtowers, the faded American and Allied flags fluttering in the desert wind. Inside the camp, soldiers moved with purpose, rifles slung over shoulders, helmets reflecting the sun like muted mirrors. Amid them, a figure in a medic's uniform walked with a calmness that felt out of place in the constant tension of war. Her name was Lieutenant Sarah Kincaid, but most of the men simply called her the nurse. They didn't say it with respect. To them, the word was almost a joke, a dismissive label they used to keep her in her place. She had earned her commission, gone through the same brutal training as many of them, and survived rotations in some of the most dangerous combat zones. But to the infantry squads who saw her checking bandages, replacing IVs, and administering painkillers, she wasn't one of them. She was just the woman who patched up their cuts and wrote reports. She heard the laughter behind her back, the comments whispered just loud enough. "She's only here because command needs to look good. Better hope the nurse doesn't faint at the sight of blood. Bet she couldn't fire a rifle straight if her life depended on it." She didn't respond, never argued, because she knew in time that war revealed the truth about everyone. Still, the mockery weighed on her. She carried it silently, the way she carried the photographs of soldiers who hadn't made it back, folded and tucked inside her journal. Every life she couldn't save marked her more than any insult. The tension in the camp rose sharply after the news of an enemy sniper operating in the nearby hills. This wasn't just any shooter. He was a phantom, an elite marksman with a confirmed kill count that spread through the ranks like rumor-made flesh. Soldiers returning from patrol spoke of bullets cracking past their helmets, comrades dropping before they even knew where the shot came from. Fear grew thick as smoke, and even the bravest kept glancing nervously at the ridges beyond the wire. The sniper wasn't just killing men, he was hunting morale. The commanders briefed everyone daily, urging caution, but no one had managed to even glimpse him. Each day, another soldier was flown out in a medevac chopper under a blood-soaked blanket. Sarah was the one who often knelt beside those men, hands pressed to wounds she knew she couldn't close, whispering comforts they barely heard. She felt their last breaths, tasted their fear, and each time the bitterness of helplessness burned hotter inside her. Still, the soldiers mocked her because when the shots rang out, she wasn't behind a rifle, she was behind a stretcher. "The nurse isn't going to stop him," one sergeant sneered when another body was brought in. "She's just here to write the death certificates." The words stung not because she believed them, but because she was tired of being seen as someone who couldn't fight back. Deep down, Sarah knew something the others didn't. Before she had ever put on the Red Cross armband, she had trained as a sharpshooter herself. Life had taken her toward medicine, toward healing, but the part of her that could steady her breathing, align the crosshairs, and squeeze the trigger with absolute calm had never disappeared. She had chosen to save lives, not take them. But war had a way of making choices for you. One evening, as the sun sank and turned the desert gold, Sarah found herself sitting alone near the edge of camp, watching the ridgeline where the sniper was rumored to hide. She thought of the men who had laughed at her earlier that day, mocking the way she carried her med kit like a purse. She thought of the young private she had failed to save that morning, the blood still staining her gloves despite all the scrubbing. And she thought of the sniper somewhere out there already planning his next shot. A chill passed through her, not of fear but of clarity. She realized then that if no one else could stop him, she might have to. Not as the nurse they mocked, but as the soldier she truly was. For the first time since arriving at the base, she opened the locked case she kept beneath her cot. Inside, wrapped in oiled cloth, was a rifle she hadn't touched in months. Her father's rifle, the one she had learned on as a teenager, the one she had trained with during her early years in the service. She ran her hand across the cold steel, feeling its weight, its silent promise. In that moment she wasn't just Sarah the medic. She was Lieutenant Kincaid, soldier and sniper, and she was done being mocked. The next day began with the same routine, briefings, patrol assignments, and the dull hum of generators echoing across the camp. Yet something in Sarah had shifted overnight. She still moved with her usual quiet precision, checking bandages, making rounds, handing out painkillers, but her eyes kept darting toward the ridgeline. Every soldier in camp feared that high ground. It had become a cursed silhouette, a reminder that they were prey in another man's hunting ground. The sniper had struck again during the night, clipping a guard right off the tower before anyone knew where the shot came from. The man was alive but broken, and Sarah had spent 2 hours trying to stabilize him as he cried out in shock, begging not to die. She saved him, but the look in his eyes, hollow knowing he would never walk again, haunted her as she rinsed the blood from her hands. Around her, soldiers muttered, some blaming leadership, others cursing the phantom shooter, but Sarah noticed how their gazes often shifted toward her as if to say, "What good is a nurse when death comes from 1,000 yards away?" She kept silent, but inside, the words had become a fuse burning closer to the charge. That evening, when the sun slid low and shadows stretched across the camp, she found herself standing by the armory. She requested a spotter scope under the pretense of monitoring incoming convoys for medical supply deliveries. The quartermaster raised an eyebrow but handed it over without much thought. With it tucked under her arm, Sarah climbed the narrow ladder of the northern watchtower. The guards looked surprised to see her there, but none dared to question. She set the scope against the railing and began to study the ridges. Hours passed. The desert was deceptively still, the air trembling with heat even as night crept in. Most would have grown impatient, but Sarah had the patience of someone who had spent nights waiting by dying men's bedsides, counting breaths, watching the slow tick of time. And then she saw it, a flicker of unnatural movement on the ridge. Not the sway of grass, not the shadow of a bird. A glint. It vanished as quickly as it appeared, but her pulse quickened. She tracked the area, eyes unblinking, until she caught another shift. The faint silhouette of a man repositioning, no more than a ghost against the rock. She didn't tell the guards beside her. They wouldn't believe her anyway. Instead, she memorized the landmarks, the broken tree trunk, the sloping rock face, the outcrop shaped like a crouching lion. She had found him. That night, lying awake on her cot, she couldn't stop replaying the image in her mind. The sniper wasn't invincible. He was flesh and blood could be ended. She opened her rifle case once more and began cleaning the weapon with slow, deliberate care, each movement methodical, each part sliding into place like she was piecing herself back together. Her fingers trembled not with fear but anticipation. The following morning, Sarah made her decision. She would go out with the next patrol. It wasn't standard for medics to embed in search sweeps beyond the wire, they were supposed to remain within reach of quick extraction. But Sarah volunteered, citing the need for on-site medical presence. The captain hesitated but eventually agreed, more concerned about manpower than doubting her capability. When the soldiers heard she was coming along, smirks spread across their faces. "What's the nurse gonna do, wave her bandages at the sniper?" one muttered. Another laughed, "Maybe she'll patch him up after he shoots us." Sarah ignored them, her face unreadable, but inside she burned with a quiet fury. If only they knew. The patrol rolled out at dawn, a convoy of 3 Humvees grinding through the dust, engines growling. Sarah sat in the second vehicle, helmet low over her brow, rifle case wedged against her boots. The soldiers around her kept glancing at her as though she were fragile cargo, someone to protect rather than fight beside. They didn't realize she had come not to be shielded, but to hunt. They reached the outskirts of a rocky valley by mid-morning, the sun already scorching overhead. The men fanned out cautiously, rifles raised, eyes scanning the cliffs. Sarah hung back at first, playing her role, but her gaze kept darting toward the landmarks she had memorized, the crouching lion outcrop, the broken tree trunk. Her breath slowed as she traced the ridge. Then the shot came. A sharp crack split the air, followed by the sickening thud of impact. A soldier near the front dropped instantly, screaming as blood spurted from his shoulder. Chaos erupted, men scrambling for cover, shouting orders, firing blindly at the ridge. Sarah dove behind a boulder, heart pounding, but her mind remained clear. She recognized the angle, the timing, the precision. It was him. The Phantom. She slid her rifle case open with deliberate slowness, as if every second stretched into eternity. Around her, men shouted for the medic, calling her name in desperation, but she didn't move toward the wounded. For once she wasn't there to heal. She assembled the rifle piece by piece, the metal clicking together with a sound that steadied her breathing. When she finally raised the scope to her eye, the world narrowed into focus. Through the lens she saw him, the sniper, crouched low, cloaked in desert camouflage, his rifle resting on a stone perch. Through the scope, the sniper was no longer a myth, no longer the invisible ghost that had haunted their camp for weeks. He was a man, focused, calm and terrifyingly skilled, but still just a man. Sarah steadied her breathing the way she had been taught years ago, the way her body remembered even after months of suppressing this part of herself. Inhale. Exhale. Slow heartbeat. She tracked the sniper's movements as he shifted, searching for his next target. Another soldier had poked his helmet out too far, and already the enemy's rifle barrel was adjusting, lining up for the kill. The chatter of panicked voices buzzed in Sarah's earpiece, officers screaming for positions, men shouting about the medic not moving to the wounded, but she tuned them all out. The world shrank until there was only her rifle and the man across the ridge. She whispered quietly to herself, words no one else could hear, "You've taken enough." Then she squeezed the trigger. The shot cracked like thunder, echoing through the valley. For a heartbeat, she thought she had missed. Her pulse spiked, her body frozen, but then she saw it. The enemy sniper jerked violently backward, his rifle sliding from his hands. He slumped against the rock, motionless. A stunned silence followed, broken only by the moans of the wounded soldier nearby. Sarah lowered her rifle slowly, the weight of what she had done pressing into her chest. The Phantom was down. She had ended him. But the fight wasn't over. The enemy sniper hadn't been working alone. He had a spotter hidden among the rocks, and Sarah saw the flash of movement just as another shot rang out. The bullet slammed into the dirt inches from her position, spraying sand across her face. Adrenaline surged through her veins, but she didn't panic. Instead, she shifted, rolled behind a different boulder, and scanned the ridge again. Her eyes caught the glint of a secondary scope, the faint curve of a helmet peeking over stone. Another marksman. They had planned for this. She steadied herself once more, adjusted her aim, and fired. The recoil jolted through her shoulder, the round streaking across the valley. This time she didn't miss either. The figure on the ridge toppled, arms flailing as he slid down the rocks. For a long moment, everything was quiet except for the wind. Then the soldiers around her erupted in disbelief. Voices shouted across the comms, "Who the hell fired that? Was that the nurse? No way, she just dropped 2 of them." Sarah ignored the chaos and finally slung her rifle, rushing toward the wounded man. Her medical instincts reclaimed control, hands moving with precision as she pressed gauze against the soldier's shoulder, wrapped the tourniquet, and shouted for morphine. She worked quickly, efficiently, the same way she had always done. Only now the others looked at her differently. The patrol limped back to base hours later, 1 man stabilized but alive thanks to her, and 2 enemies left dead on the ridge. The mood was electric, confused, and shaken. Soldiers who had mocked her just days before now whispered with awe, eyes following her as if she were someone entirely new. "The nurse took out the sniper," someone muttered as she walked past. Another corrected him, "Not the nurse, the shooter." The story spread through the camp faster than gunfire, each retelling more embellished than the last. Some swore she had made the shot from an impossible distance. Others claimed she had taken down an entire squad by herself. Sarah said nothing. She sat quietly by her cot that evening, cleaning her rifle once more, hands steady, mind calm. She didn't bask in the attention or the sudden respect. She hadn't done it for them. She had done it for the men she couldn't save, for the boy she had watched bleed out that morning, for all the faces she carried in her journal. Still, she couldn't deny the shift in the air. No one called her just the nurse anymore. When she walked through the mess tent, silence followed her, not mockery. When she passed by squads preparing for patrol, their nods carried weight, their smirks gone. She had proven herself in a way none of them could deny. Yet Sarah knew the war wouldn't let her rest on one victory. The death of the Phantom sniper had crippled enemy operations, but command intelligence soon confirmed what she had suspected. He wasn't alone. He had been part of an elite unit, a network of sharpshooters spread across the region. His fall meant another would rise to take his place, maybe worse, maybe hungrier for revenge. And this time the enemy knew about her. That night, as Sarah lay awake listening to the distant thud of artillery and the hum of helicopters overhead, she felt the shift deep in her chest. The soldiers had finally seen what she was capable of, but now the enemy would too. She had stepped out of the shadows, revealed herself not only as a healer but as a hunter. The war had a way of consuming those who revealed too much, demanding more and more until nothing was left. Sarah closed her eyes, fingers brushing the rifle beside her cot, and whispered to the silence, "Come for me if you dare." The camp was never the same after that day. Where once there had been laughter at Sarah's expense, now there was silence, and beneath that silence, respect mixed with unease. Soldiers who used to mock her now avoided eye contact, as if unsure how to approach the woman who had done what none of them could. In the mess hall, conversations halted when she entered, then resumed in hushed tones once she sat down. They whispered about her, about how calm she had looked lining up her shot, about the way the Phantom sniper had dropped like a rag doll after weeks of terrorizing them. To many it was a story of relief, almost mythic, the nurse who killed the killer. But Sarah herself didn't feel heroic. She sat at her table alone, eating her rations without tasting them, her mind replaying every detail of the shot, every flicker of movement in the scope, every breath she had taken. She knew she had done what had to be done, but with every kill came a price. She could still see the enemy's face in her scope, caught in that final instant between life and death, the surprise etched into his eyes as the bullet struck. She had saved lives, yes, but she had also taken one, and it was a weight she carried silently. That night, she returned to her journal. She added not just the photo of the soldier she had failed to save, but a blank page marked with a single note, for the sniper. It was her way of remembering that even the enemy was human, even the man who had taken so many lives before she ended his. But the war didn't give her time to dwell. Within days the enemy retaliated. The patrols grew deadlier, the ambushes more frequent. Intel confirmed her fear. The fallen sniper had belonged to a small but highly skilled unit, each trained to operate independently. His death had rattled them, but it had also provoked them. One night, the base came under sustained fire from mortars and machine guns, a rare direct assault that left the camp rattled but standing. Sarah worked tirelessly through the night, treating burns, shrapnel wounds and concussions, her hands slick with blood until dawn. Yet amid the chaos, she felt something more sinister. The attack hadn't just been a random offensive. It was bait. They wanted her rattled, wanted her distracted, maybe even wanted to lure her into the open again. When the shelling ended and the camp quieted, she realized the enemy wasn't simply targeting soldiers anymore. They were targeting her. The phantom sniper had been their ghost in the hills, and now she had become the ghost in their nightmares. She had taken his place whether she wanted it or not. Command noticed the shift as well. During a briefing, the captain addressed her directly for the first time in front of the others, his tone clipped but respectful. "Lieutenant Kincaid, you've shown skill beyond your medical duties. We may need that again." The soldiers looked between them, some in disbelief, some nodding grimly. Sarah felt the weight of every eye in the room. She wanted to object, to say she was here to save lives, not take them, but the words caught in her throat. She knew she couldn't hide anymore. The war had already dragged her back into the role she had once left behind. After the meeting, several soldiers approached her. Their voices were different now, not mocking but careful, almost reverent. "Ma'am," one said awkwardly, "if you'd ever want to, train us, maybe we could learn from you." Another added, "You saved us out there. We were wrong about you." Sarah listened, gave a small nod, but inside she felt no pride. Respect wasn't what she had sought. All she had ever wanted was to keep them alive. Yet now the very thing that had earned their respect was the thing that risked consuming her soul. The next patrol proved how true her fears were. They moved through a canyon at dawn, sunlight slicing down the stone walls, when the first shot rang out. A bullet missed by inches, ricocheting off the rocks. Then another, closer, forcing the soldiers to dive for cover. It was a textbook ambush, but unlike before, the enemy didn't aim for just anyone. They were aiming for her. Bullets tore into the ground where she ran, pinged off the metal plate of the Humvee beside her. Soldiers shouted for her to stay down, to let them handle it, but Sarah knew what was happening. They weren't just fighting an enemy squad. They were fighting an enemy sniper who wanted to make a point. Crawling behind a boulder, Sarah pulled her rifle free once more. Her heart hammered, but her hands were steady. She scanned the cliffs, searching for the telltale glint, the unnatural shape. It didn't take long. There, nestled in the shadow of a jagged rock, was the faint outline of a barrel. Her finger hovered on the trigger, ready, but this time the sniper was ready too. The moment she adjusted her scope, a bullet screamed past her head, cracking stone inches from her ear. He had seen her. This wasn't just another marksman. This was someone trained to her level, maybe even beyond. The firefight raged around her, the air thick with dust and gunpowder. Sarah stayed low, breathing slow, locking onto the enemy's position. He was good, fast, disciplined, precise, but she had an advantage he didn't. She wasn't just hunting him, she was protecting those around her. Every soldier in that canyon was her patient, every heartbeat her responsibility. She couldn't let him take another one. She adjusted her aim, shifted her weight, and waited. The enemy made the mistake she had been hoping for. A brief reposition, a slight rise above the rock. Sarah squeezed the trigger. The shot ripped through the canyon and the sniper toppled back. Shouts of victory erupted from her squad, but Sarah didn't move, didn't celebrate. She stayed fixed on her scope, scanning the ridges because she knew what this meant. Another would come. They wouldn't stop until she was the one lying in the dirt. The ride back to camp after that firefight was suffocating. The soldiers cheered in the Humvee, slapping each other on the shoulders, telling and retelling how Lieutenant Kincaid had once again taken out a sniper who had nearly pinned them all down. But Sarah sat in silence, staring out the armored window as the desert rolled past in shades of dust and stone. She wasn't listening to their words, not really. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the enemy's face as he fell backward, the echo of her shot ringing in her skull. The adrenaline had faded, leaving behind the familiar heaviness of guilt and the gnawing certainty that the war had claimed another piece of her. She wanted to believe she was saving lives by eliminating threats, but in truth she knew she was stepping deeper into a role she had once rejected. She was supposed to be a medic, a healer, a shield against death. Yet here she was, becoming the very weapon she had sworn she would never become again. She pressed her palms into her thighs to steady herself, whispering under her breath so no one else could hear, "You're still the nurse. You're still here to save them." But the words rang hollow, drowned out by the weight of the rifle case wedged against her boots. When they returned, the camp atmosphere shifted even more. The captain called her into his office that evening, maps spread across the desk, intelligence reports stacked in messy piles. "Lieutenant," he said, voice firm, "you've become more than just a medic out there. We need your eyes. Command believes the enemy snipers are working in cells. We take them out, we cripple their operations. I want you on Overwatch for the next missions." Sarah stood stiffly, her jaw tight. Overwatch? They weren't asking her to patch wounds anymore. They were asking her to pull the trigger, officially sanctioned by command. She wanted to protest, to say no, to remind them she hadn't joined this rotation to kill. But the memory of the young private bleeding out in her arms came back, the helplessness of watching life slip away because no one had silenced the threat. That memory sealed her answer before she even spoke. She gave a single nod. The captain's eyes softened just slightly, as though he knew the battle she was fighting inside, but he didn't press. Orders were orders. The following days blurred into an exhausting cycle. At dawn, she was on the ridge with her rifle, scanning valleys and outcrops for threats. At noon, she was in the medical tent, stitching wounds and setting broken bones. At night, she cleaned her weapon in silence while the soldiers nearby exchanged nervous laughter and whispered about how unstoppable she was. They no longer mocked her, no longer dismissed her, but their admiration unsettled her even more. Respect felt heavier than ridicule because it carried expectation. Every time they looked at her, she saw not just gratitude but dependence, as if she alone could keep death at bay. And the truth was she couldn't. War was a hungry beast. For every sniper she felled, another threat emerged, another ambush unfolded. She was saving some lives, yes, but losing others still, and no matter how many she patched up or avenged, the tally never came out clean. One night, while cleaning her rifle by lantern light, a young corporal approached her tent hesitantly. He was barely more than a boy, freckles across his nose, eyes wide with the kind of fear that never left in a place like this. "Lieutenant," he began awkwardly, I just wanted to thank you. If you hadn't been there in the canyon, I'd be dead. You saved me." She looked up at him, saw the sincerity trembling in his voice, and managed a small nod. "I'm just doing my duty," she said softly. But he shook his head. "No, you're doing more. Everyone here knows it." Then he left, leaving her alone with her thoughts. The words should have comforted her, but instead, they cut deeper. More. That was what everyone wanted. More from her, more shots, more miracles. And every time she gave more, she lost more of herself. She wondered how much of Sarah Kincaid, the nurse, the healer, would be left by the time this war ended. The next mission came quickly. A reconnaissance team had gone missing beyond the northern ridge, and command suspected another sniper cell was waiting in ambush. Sarah was assigned to Overwatch, paired with a spotter for the first time. The spotter, Sergeant Hale, was a hardened veteran, scar across his cheek, eyes sharp but curious as he studied her. "Didn't expect my partner to be the camp's medic," he remarked quietly as they hiked toward their position. Sarah didn't reply, just adjusted the strap of her rifle case and kept moving. On the ridge they settled in, scopes sweeping the landscape. Hours passed in silence, the desert sun baking the rocks, until movement flickered in the valley below. A squad of enemy fighters moved with uncanny precision, too careful, too staged. It was bait again, she realized. And then she saw it, a faint shimmer against the cliff face, the unmistakable glint of glass. Her breath caught. Another sniper. No, two. Her hands tightened on the rifle, her pulse steadying. Hale noticed her stillness. "You see them?" he whispered. She gave a single nod. His voice dropped lower. "Then it's yours." Sarah exhaled slowly, aligning her crosshairs. For a heartbeat, she hesitated. Every life she had taken replayed in her head, every face haunting her. But then she thought of the missing recon team, likely lying in wait to be slaughtered if she didn't act. She steadied her breathing, aimed and fired. One shot. One kill. The first sniper dropped instantly. The second spun in panic, but before he could relocate, her follow-up shot punched through his scope, sending glass and blood spraying across the rock. Silence fell across the ridge, broken only by Hale's low whistle. "You weren't kidding," he murmured. But Sarah didn't smile, didn't celebrate. She simply lowered her rifle, her expression unreadable. She had done what needed to be done again. Yet as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the desert in red and shadow, she couldn't shake the sense that every shot she fired chained her further to the war, pulling her deeper into a darkness she might never escape. The following morning, Elena rose before the sun had even broken over the distant ridgelines. Her body ached from the exhaustion of the previous night, yet her spirit burned with a kind of intensity she had never known. She washed her face in a cold basin of water, the icy shock sharpening her senses, then meticulously tied back her dark hair. The uniform she wore was the same faded medic fatigues, patched and worn from months in the field, but when she fastened her boots and slid the holstered sidearm against her hip, she felt a different kind of weight settle upon her. It wasn't just the weight of survival anymore, it was the weight of command, of responsibility, of expectation. Her fellow soldiers had seen her strike down the sniper, had watched as she exposed the strength behind the quiet nurse facade. And now their eyes followed her not with doubt but with trust. The camp bustled with activity, yet there was a strange reverence in the air whenever she passed. Young privates straightened their backs unconsciously, officers gave her curt nods, almost deferential. Some even whispered her name like a legend in the making. Elena ignored the murmurs, though she couldn't help but overhear fragments. The nurse who killed the ghost sniper, our guardian angel, the medic with fire in her blood. She refused to let pride overtake her, but she did not deny the reality either. War was built on stories, and sometimes those stories were what kept men alive in the trenches. If her story gave them strength, she would bear it. But Elena knew well that stories alone did not win battles. The sniper had only been the first of many challenges ahead. Reports streamed into headquarters that the enemy's elite units had been mobilized after the loss of their marksman. They would not let such a humiliation stand. The name of the fallen sniper carried weight on the other side as well, and vengeance would surely follow. Elena felt the heavy silence in the command tent that afternoon as the officers discussed strategy, maps stretched across a battered wooden table. When her eyes traced the red arrows pushing dangerously close to their supply lines, she realized the sniper's death had been more than a symbolic victory, it had also triggered a chain reaction. The enemy would strike harder, faster, more viciously than before. That evening, as the horizon bled into fiery oranges and deep purples, Elena sat outside the camp, cleaning her rifle with steady, deliberate motions. She thought of the enemy soldiers, of the men and women preparing their own rifles just across the fields, no different in blood or flesh than the comrades around her. She had not chosen this war. She had only wanted to heal, to preserve life in a place where it was constantly slipping away. Yet war had its own cruel rhythm, and survival demanded more than just bandages and sutures. Her hands, once meant to stitch wounds and ease pain, now bore the scars of recoil and the scent of gunpowder. She closed her eyes for a long moment, whispering to herself, "I must remain both, the healer and the protector. One without the other will not survive here." A shadow moved behind her, and she glanced back to see Corporal Jansen, one of the younger soldiers she had patched up only weeks ago. He hesitated before speaking, clearly nervous. "Ma'am," he began, his voice unsteady, I wanted to thank you. If you hadn't taken that shot, I wouldn't be here. None of us would." His face was pale, haunted by too many nights under fire, but his eyes carried a spark of something new, belief. Elena offered him a small smile, though her own heart was heavy. "It wasn't just me, Corporal. We stand because all of us stand together. Remember that." He nodded quickly, almost embarrassed, before retreating back to the camp. Yet his words lingered with her, warming her in the cold night air. For the first time, Elena understood how much her presence meant to them, not only as a medic but as a fighter who refused to yield. The next dawn shattered the fragile calm. The enemy advanced, artillery roaring like thunder over the hills. The earth shook beneath the bombardment, and the sky filled with choking smoke. Elena was already at her station, barking orders as wounded streamed in. Her hands moved with practiced precision, bandaging, injecting morphine, stitching torn flesh, but her ears caught every cry from the battlefield beyond. When the perimeter lines buckled and enemy units pressed close enough that gunfire rattled the very walls of the infirmary, Elena grabbed her rifle without hesitation. She fought alongside those she had just healed, firing steady, deliberate shots into the chaos, her voice rising above the din. "Hold the line. Do not break." Hours bled into a blur of smoke, sweat, and blood. By the time the sun dipped once more, painting the battlefield in long crimson shadows, the attack had faltered. Their camp still stood, battered but unbroken. Soldiers slumped in exhaustion, some weeping openly, others silent in shock. Elena walked among them, her boots heavy with mud, her uniform splattered with blood, some of it hers, most of it not. Her body screamed for rest, but her spirit remained unyielding. She had seen the worst of humanity that day and had stood her ground. And though she had no illusions about the battles yet to come, she knew this much: she would no longer be mocked, underestimated, or ignored. She was the nurse who fought, the medic who killed, the protector who healed. The dust had barely settled from the last confrontation, but Elena knew the war was far from over. Her strike against the sniper had earned her both respect and the attention of dangerous enemies. Rumors spread fast in war zones, and the name "the nurse sniper" was already echoing in hushed conversations. Some called her a hero, others whispered that she was a phantom of vengeance. For Elena, it wasn't about reputation, it was about survival and protecting those who still had hope. But deep down she felt the shift. She was no longer seen as a fragile medic. She had become a symbol of defiance, whether she wanted it or not. The following days tested her endurance. The wounded poured into the camp faster than she could treat them, each face a reminder of how fragile life was. Yet in the quiet hours of dawn, when the world was momentarily still, she practiced. She polished her rifle, steadied her breathing, and refined the patience that had allowed her to outwit the elite sniper. Her comrades noticed, some with admiration, others with unease. She was still a nurse, but her eyes carried the fire of a soldier. One evening, an old sergeant approached her with a battered helmet in his hand. "You've got the heart of a fighter, girl," he muttered. "But remember this: courage without control turns to recklessness. Don't lose what makes you different." His words etched themselves deep into her, a warning she couldn't ignore. The enemy, however, had not been idle. Scouts reported unusual movements on the ridges, and Elena's instincts prickled. It wasn't just patrols, it was a hunt. She realized that by killing one of their best snipers, she had put herself on a target list. The thought of being hunted should have chilled her, but instead, it sharpened her focus. If they wanted her, they would have to face her on her terms. That night, she volunteered to join a recon mission along the cliffs, a decision that startled even the commander. "You're a medic?" he said, disbelief in his tone. "Why risk yourself in the field?" Elena's response was calm, almost cold: "Because they won't stop coming. And I refuse to wait here for death to find me." The commander studied her, then gave a reluctant nod. The recon mission was grueling. The air was thin, the rocks jagged, and every step carried the weight of silence. Elena moved with deliberate care, her rifle slung across her back and her medic bag tight against her side. To her team it was strange seeing her in this dual role, healer and hunter, but none dared question her resolve. As they crept along the ridge, Elena's sharp eyes caught a flicker of light far ahead. A scope reflection. She froze, lifted her hand, and signaled the team to drop low. The sniper's position was clear to her, even in the fading dusk. They were being stalked, and had she not been there, the team would have walked right into death. Her pulse quickened, but her hands were steady as she adjusted her rifle. This wasn't just instinct anymore, it was training forged through fire. The standoff stretched into an eternity. The enemy sniper, cautious after their comrade's fall, was patient. Elena matched that patience, her body still as stone, her breathing synced with the wind. Around her, the team waited, trusting her completely. For a moment, the world narrowed to just two figures separated by distance and shadows, the hunter and the hunted. And then, with a flicker of movement, she saw her chance. Her finger squeezed the trigger, and the shot cracked through the silence. The echo rolled across the cliffs, followed by the sound of a body collapsing onto rock. Elena didn't move immediately, she kept her eye on the scope, making sure the threat was truly gone. Only when the stillness returned did she exhale, a long, controlled breath that carried away the tension. Her comrades stared at her with a mix of awe and disbelief. "You saved us," one whispered almost reverently. Elena shook her head. "No," she replied quietly, "I just did what had to be done." Yet inside, a storm raged. Each pull of the trigger weighed on her differently than stitching wounds or bandaging burns. Healing brought life, killing ended it. She wondered how long she could walk this thin line between nurse and warrior before it consumed her completely. That night as the team returned, the commander placed